my shadow to blend in with the rest of my scene, there's a couple ways I can do it. One thing is I can just change the opacity. So in the layers, there's an opacity, and I can just change the opacity. And that kind of works because we can see through the see through the shadow and into the grass and the water and stuff like that. But it doesn't actually blend together like it would in real life. So another way we can do this is we can change our blend mode. And you can do this with any one of your layers. Up here, next to the opacity, this list is your blend modes. And there's a lot of different blend modes that are going to blend the two images together in different ways. So I'm going to choose, let's see, what's a good one for this? Overlay might be a good one. You can kind of see what they look like. So they're basically just doing math on the pixels. So for example, if I do multiply, that multiplies the color of the shadow by the color below it. And that, since the shadow is darker, it makes everything darker. So that's not exactly what I want. Then there's some that do sort of more sophisticated things. And you can kind of look through and see what looks the best. Overlay might be the best one for this. Soft light is a little more subtle. Hard light, we can see a little more of the shadow. So there's a few different options. You can kind of go through and see what looks the best. And if you want something that's, not necessarily realistic, you can do something that, looks kind of glitchy or distorted. You can get some cool different effects. So I'm going to go with overlay for this one. But now I have that issue where I can see the edges of my shadow. So I can go back and refine my mask a little bit. I can shift the edge in a bit, and then I can feather it a bit. And so now it's pretty subtle. We can barely see the shadow, but it is there. So it depends on what you want, what look you're going for. If you want the shadow to be more visible, we can change the overlay to something else. But if you like that kind of subtle, like it's barely there, you might want to keep something like that. So you can do blend modes for all of your different layers. So if I take my bird and change the blend mode, you'll see it blends in differently with the rest of the scene. Most of the time I want to stick with the normal blend mode, but there's also different adjustments that I can make that change the way that our layers interact with each other. So the blend mode changes how the pixels are put together. We can also add adjustments, and we can add filters to change the way that our layers work together. So I'm going to start with an adjustment. I can do this. So I'm going to take my bird. I'm going to move my bird up to the top for a second. So with my bird, I can actually change the color in the layer itself. So if I go to image and go to adjustments, there's a bunch of different options here. So for example, if I go to levels, I can change the level of each color. So if I choose like green, I can change how much green is in my data. And that'll create this little filter here that only applies to my layer. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to delete this though. Oops. Or I'll just undo. Oh, it's not letting me undo. Let's go to my history. Okay. Another thing I can do is I can add an adjustment layer that affects everything below it. So if I go over to adjustments, it's this other panel here. If you don't see it there, just go to window and click on adjustments. And there's a bunch of different adjustments that I can add, and this is going to add a new layer, and it's going to apply those adjustments to everything below it. So for example, if I want to change the levels of my entire image, I can add a levels adjustment, and it opens this little property panel. I'm going to get rid of this paths thing because I'm not really using it. And so now if I change the levels, I can change like the lighting, I can up the brightness, up the contrast, I can do all sorts of different stuff. And it's going to apply to all of the layers below that level. So maybe I want my scene to be darker, but I want my bird to stand out. I could just move this adjustment layer down, and now it only applies to the layer below it. So there's a lot of cool effects you can do with this. I'm going to delete this one and make a new one. So another adjustment that I like is the gradient map. Okay, so it's going to apply the colors in my gradient to the colors in my scene. And I can click on the gradient and edit it. So I can maybe change this black color. So right now it's somewhere between black and white, but I can add a red color or maybe some orange or something like that. And so now it maps all the colors from the colors that I had to new colors. I can change this white value, something blue, so I can get a kind of a cool effect that way. I could say, okay, maybe I actually want this reversed. And then I can change the amount of color that I'm getting from the different parts of my gradient. Maybe I want something like this where they're really close to each other. So I can get a lot of cool effects that way. So there's a lot of different adjustments you can do. I'm not going to go over all of them because it would take a while, but you guys can play around with those. I can also add in a third color. So if I want to, get really wild, I can add in some pink. I can get some kind of cool effects that way. And again, if I want to only apply this to my background, I can move my adjustment layer and I can apply it just to the background, or I can move it up and I apply it to the whole scene. So the adjustment layer is, so I can add one of these adjustments just to one layer, but I can also add a separate layer that applies to everything inside or below that layer. Okay, one more thing to cover. So I'm gonna bring this down here so we can focus on our bird for a second. Actually, let's put this up here. I can apply this to the whole thing too. So another thing I can do besides adjustment layers to change the pixels and the look of my scene is filters. So I'm going to add another layer. And under the top menu, I have filters. And I can add stuff in here. So again, I can apply this to one layer or I can apply it to every layer. So for example, if I want to add some noise. Oops. Okay, let's add this to my gradient map. So I have to actually have some data here to add a filter. So I'm going to choose my gradient map, which applies to everything. I'm going to go to filter and go to noise and click add noise. And this adds noise. It's going to give the look of like film grain or something like that. And I can change how much noise there is. And it's kind of a subtle effect, but you can see with no noise, you see the difference. And then if I add a lot of noise, I get this kind of nice film grain effect. And I can change the type of noise, although you probably won't notice the difference that much. And so that's kind of a cool effect. It's subtle, but you can see there's this noise being applied to all of my pixels. And I can turn that off if I want. So I'm not destroying any of the original data. I'm just creating these filters on top. I can also add a filter just to one part. So let's take my sunset. I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to add a filter. I can do, there's all these different filters. You can play around with these. Maybe I can do, let's see, oil paint might be kind of cool. And so this is going to kind of stylize. If I want to see how it's actually going to look, I can click preview. And so I can change the amount of stylization. Can change how clean it is. This is kind of a subtle effect. If I increase the scale, now we can kind of see it's a little, we can see the brush strokes a little bit more. So we can get kind of an interesting filter. We can change the lighting. So that changes the lighting on our brush strokes.
What if I wanted to add filters to like different parts of the picture? Like if I just wanted to add like a filter specifically to like a certain area in the sky.
Yeah. So you could do that with a selection. So that filter I just added actually changed my whole sunset. I probably don't really want to do that. So I could add an adjustment layer and then add the filter. But if I want to just filter one part, I can use a selection for that. So I could go, I'd probably use the magic wand for this and just grab the sky maybe. Although the bird is in there. How do I get the bird? I guess actually the bird is in front of it, so I don't actually care if it. Yeah, I'm just getting the sky, so never mind. That's fine. So this isn't a very good one, but I'm just going to select the part of the sky. And then if I go back to filter, and I'll do a different one just for the heck of it. Let's do twirl. This is going to be, yeah, it's not going to be very clear how this is working. Maybe that's not a good one. Let's do filter. Let's do pixelate, mosaic. Okay, so that's kind of cool. We get this like weird pixelated version. So if I have a selection and I do a filter, it's only going to apply to that part of the selection. But again, this is going to change my original image. So now this sunset image, I can't undo that. So what I might want to do is make a copy of that layer and apply it to a different layer, or I could do it as an adjustment layer. So let's just duplicate my sunset. And then I'll apply my filter. I think I did this one, yeah. And so I can stylize. And there's a lot of different adjustments. There's a lot of different filters. There's a ton of different stuff you can do with this. So you guys can play around with that. Let's stop for a second, and then I have one more part to go over, but I'll stop the recording.